The man that built the XRP ledger is doubting you clowns on X and your 10K per coin price predictions. Not to say that can't happen, and that's not to say that's never going to be his idea, but it certainly isn't now. From this tweet here, David Schwartz says XRP would already be higher if $10,000, the target, were credible. Schwartz says if rich investors believe XRP could hit 10K, they would have already pushed the price to at least $20. So what's David talking about here? Let's get into this and let's build a case here for, the how XRP works, the token issuance of XRP, or how new XRP comes to market. Let's talk about this thing, and then we can get into what David's talking about here with this EV formula he's implicitly describing here. So on the first day of every month, so May 1st this month, 1 billion XRP tokens just got released. That was on the same day of the XRP Las Vegas event held in Las Vegas, where Brad Garlinghouse, David Schwartz were there talking. David Schwartz was talking with a bunch of people, and people were like live streaming or recording, and you probably saw a lot of that footage on X. And so the first of every month, 1 billion XRP tokens gets released, and 70 to 80% of those XRP tokens are then added back into Ripple escrow accounts or added to new accounts held by and custodied by Ripple Labs and their smart contracts. So, they're basically added to the queue. So it keeps pushing back how many XRP tokens, like when the final Ripple escrow release will happen. So it continuously is pushed back. And so with this, you have like a 4 to 6% inflation rate, and that's something to be aware of. But this has been occurring since December of 2017. This has just been one of the key points of XRP, and one of a point of criticism as it relates to the decentralization, centralization factor of XRP. And of course, Ripple will then sell a portion over the counter in these over the counter transactions. So they might sell a portion, they'll keep some for how much they ever see fit, and then the rest gets put back into escrow accounts. And so at the event we're talking about here, people were bringing this up about the escrow release. People were even bringing up again, burn the escrow. And then again, David Schwartz is like, why? Look at XLM. Look at November 2019. SDF did a burn. Nothing happened. Okay. So these are concepts that people don't quite understand yet. And so when we're talking about, so what's Schwartz saying in this second line here that you guys can see on screen? Schwartz says, if rich investors believed XRP could hit $10,000, they would already push the price to at least $20. And this is explained in X. And so he uses a typical evaluation measure. He's trying to take the percentage, the probability, let's just say 1% of people expect XRP to hit $10,000 per coin one day. Don't you think that it would at least be at $20 by now? Because with that formula, what you're saying there is 1% times 10,000, that today would be reflected in a $100 per coin asset. That's not reflected today. XRP is at $1.40. And so we have not seen that reflection. And so he's bringing this into account. He's basically saying, don't tell me what you believe, show me where the money is. Okay. And so if that was truly the case, then XRP price would surely be bid up higher, but it's not. And so he ended up in this, you can see here, he says, why aren't they? Is it a conspiracy theory? So he's using basic financial logic, using evaluation models to determine what could be the price, because XRP is open to everyone. Anyone could buy XRP, private companies, ETFs are purchasing XRP. There's over $1 billion in assets under management by the top 7 spot ETF issuers in America. Globally, it's over $2.6 billion that ETF managers are now custodying XRP. So there is a narrative here. But Matt, don't we just love the price predictions from the XRP community? I mean, like, come on, what are we doing here?
Oh, it's exhaustive. I feel like it's probably one of the more exhaustive communities as far as like how egregious the price predictions get. I think that's, for the most part, we've kind of honed in expectations on Bitcoin, ETH, maybe even Solana, as far as kind of like how high and how far things can go. But for whatever reason, the XRP community continues to rally around the $10,000 XRP explicitly. And the narrative behind that changes constantly, whether it's going to be BlackRock needing to hoard all your XRP and pay you an egregious APY because they need your XRP so badly, or you have all these, conspiracies about all these NDAs that are being signed right now, and all these are about central banks, and central banks are going to be utilizing XRP exclusively in their protocols, and that's going to be driving price exponentially higher. And I think there's just a huge cohort of influencers out there that have just gravitated towards these narratives because they are what gets the views and what gets the clicks and what keeps your guys' attention, because they're promising you guys something that is extremely unrealistic, right? Bearable Bull, great example of that. What's going up, guys? $10,000 XRP. Like it is really very exhausting because there's nothing to support it. There isn't. There's nothing that actually supports it, and especially with the timelines that they associate with it. I think that's the part that frustrates me the most is they'll say, oh, in 5 to 6 years, right? Or 5 to 8 years, we'll get to $10,000 because this, and this will happen. But it's just such an unreasonable series of dominoes that they set up. And none of those dominoes, even on their own, stand very firmly. And then we also have to see all those dominoes fall in perfect synchronous form. It's just not going to happen. I mean, you think about even market capitalization, which is another idea that isn't really even like a theory. It is just a measurement of capital based on, total circulating supply and total number of tokens that are out there, current market value of that. You have to consider, total global economy and other assets that are 5 times the size and how long it took them to grow to the size that they are. So can XRP hit 5 figures at some point in the future? Yeah, it's maybe possible. But you don't really have the same incentive, right? We've talked in the past about the drops of XRP that are being burnt per transaction. We obviously don't have fresh emissions that are coming out. Only escrow unlocks and some of those tokens can bleed back into circulation. Been talks about offering staking rewards potentially, but that would change some of the mechanics of how XRP works in its raw form today. So there might be little tweaks and nuances that can change and hopefully increase price more steadily over time. But I personally believe that growth is going to come out of just consistent growth out of total market cap for crypto. And XRP will always have a very nice slice of that. But if you guys even just do the raw math of what's required for a $10,000 XRP, and you look at XRP right now at $87 billion based on the 60 billion-ish tokens that are out there right now, the amount of capital you need to see to flood into the crypto markets as a whole to achieve that price point is trillions and trillions of dollars. And I just don't think it's realistic. So I think that personally, in the next 10 plus years, seeing a 3-figure XRP, probably a realistic expectation. Asking for 5 figures or more is just a pipe dream, and it's a cute idea, but I won't be holding my breath on that. I'll continuously be stacking into other opportunities that will bring me a much more realistic ROI, and that's also where market cap plays into this. I think a lot of people forget that, XRP, when it did that first 60,000% move or whatever, market capitalization was a tiny fraction of what it is today. And that is just a narrative that people continue to push off to the side because it doesn't feed their personal wishes and desires, but it takes more capital to make that same multiple happen as market cap grows. So I think XRP has a long, successful future ahead of it. But this is a narrative that doesn't help anybody. In fact, I think it frustrates people more than anything. I've seen people on our previous videos talk about, oh, I'm very unimpressed with XRP's performance. All right, well, you just got into XRP in the last year and a half. So I think market timing, market expectations, timeline expectations, all that together can sometimes create a negative narrative of a very high quality asset that is growing at a consistent rate.
Yeah, if you've thought about buying XRP in the past, you've probably seen a lot of cute ideas online. And there's a bullish case I want to talk about, which isn't so bullish. And then there's a bearish case that people gave in response to some of the things David Schwartz was saying on X. So the bullish case was bringing into Ripple Treasury and their Ripple Prime platform. So it's connected to 13,000 banks, $12.5 trillion in asset moves. If that was moved on the XRP ledger, they say, well, that would bid up price to $625 per XRP coin. And that's completely unjustified because the XRP ledger is demand neutral. You can send and receive XRP without creating any demand on the network. There's no long-term demand in a transaction there. It's quickly sold for RLUSD or XRP, and it moves into the other assets. So that is the bullish case they were describing online. But then I saw this bearish case, and it does not look that good if you actually look at on-chain metrics. And, this is something as an XRP holder, you probably want to stay away from. I have always stayed away from XRP metrics, and I've rather given the argument that, hey, over time, the adoption that Ripple will see, that will bleed into the XRP ledger, along with the greater total crypto market. The altcoins, even today, are seeing pretty good price appreciation. Bitcoin's doing very well in the face of the stock market fumbling in this latest Iran news that's happening with the UAE and Iran. UAE attacking like 6 boats. And so now there's escalation there. And so now we see risk on markets turning over. And so I hope we don't see that in Bitcoin and crypto, but it's only a matter of time, I feel like. And so the bearish case that the alternative people were offering under some of the things that David Schwartz and the big XRP bulls We're saying that, well, XRP's 41st in total value lock, XRP's 46th in developer adoption. XRP, the XRP ledger full-time, has 62 full-time developers when you compare that with Ethereum, over 31,000, Solana, 17,000. So it's really not incomparable when you look at on-chain metrics. When you look at stablecoin issuance, only 0.1%, less than 1% of real-world asset market share. So you have a $90 billion market cap in XRP, but there's no on-chain activity to show for it. And so that's where the big question. So if people are going to argue for volume on the XRP ledger, okay, well, Ripple Treasury is going to be doing transactions on the XRP ledger, but it's demand neutral and it shows no long-term prospects or no long-term price appreciation for XRP holders. That's not really an argument to me. And the bearish argument in that case sounds a lot stronger. And this was all under the Schwartz tweets that you can go look up right now. But I did want to give that to you because the argumentation is very poor. And so what I did love about David Schwartz, pat him on the back, he's talking about the Clarity Act, all right? He was talking about, while it's not perfect, it is necessary to push this through. And, I tend to agree with him, because it's establishing permanently the classification of commodities, broker dealers, the CFTC involvement with custodians, the separation of SEC and CFTC. They're working together right now, but investment securities for the SEC, commodities for the CFTC, what gets classified. Also an exemption for decentralized finance platforms that meet a certain decentralized criteria that they've made up. And so that is what's coming with Clarity. But the holdup with that is there's a markup scheduled before May 21st, but it's looking like it could eventually be shelved. This whole Clarity Act thing that we've been talking about for a year, it could actually be shelved. And this was something I was talking about last year with the push of the Genius Act. They were trying to include a lot of the Clarity Act so they can do this one big push for it. And I don't know if I could pull up that show again, but I was like much in favor of that because now we're a year later and now we're struggling to possibly even get the Clarity Act put on President Trump's desk for signing. And we still have a markup. There's still so much steps to go through before the Memorial Day, what do you call it? Recess, Memorial Day recess. And so there's a lot of on hold here right now, Matt. And, if you look at, the U.S. as a whole, I know a lot of people have been talking about this new Fed chair and how he's dovish and how, President Trump has been explicit in his expectation for rate cuts. And, of course, Kevin Warsh is going to be more pro rate cuts than Jerome Powell. So he's supposed to come in. Kevin Warsh is supposed to come in next week, but Fed rate cuts this year, there's like a 93% of no cuts on the June meeting. And so we're like not even expecting rate cuts till later this year, even though Kevin Warsh is very pro the AI deflationary thesis and, looking at a mean of the inflation figures, but still not probably going to see rate cuts later this year, which is very helpful to risk on markets like Bitcoin and XRP and all the other ones we talk about. So, but getting back to the thesis here, Matt, the thesis has to be long-term vision for XRP. There has to be long-term holders. Spot XRP issuers have accumulated a lot of XRP, over 828 million here in America. That's a lot. That's like 1% of all XRP in dollar amount, in token amount, but $1.5 billion worth in assets under management by these ETF issuers. So that's a long-term thesis. Like we've seen like Bitcoin, we see the ETF issuers, we've seen the Bitcoin treasuries. Unfortunately, in this year, we have seen nothing come to fruition with XRP treasury strategies by companies. Vivo Power fell through. They ended up becoming AI data center centric. They did something weird with their Ripple private equity holdings. All these other companies, it was kind of just for the narrative. It looked like they were going to do payments, but nothing ever really came to fruition. So these are all things that were promoted last year that were going to come, and then they never came, probably because of the market kind of falling a little bit down here, and XRP token probably not doing as great as everyone anticipated, especially these people like Kevin Chen at Vivo Power and all the reps. there. And, there was a bunch of other ones, Trident Digital and plenty of others that were going to establish an XRP treasury, but never came to fruition because, they couldn't stand the volatility, I would assume, honestly, because that was the main thing. It's like, can you handle the volatility? Well, yeah, we're going to buy XRP and then we're going to stake it up on Flare. And it's like, you guys are doing AI data centers now. So obviously not. And so, Matt, anything to wrap up here? So some of the commentary about 10K predictions. Can you tell a little bit of the audience, like maybe what goes into your estimation of future price of XRP?
Yeah. So, obviously we always want to look at the expected amount of market capital required to reach that price. So we, for a lot of our modeling, when we use our technical analysis, we're going to be using our Fibonacci extension tool to look at a cluster of different probabilities of where we could potentially land price-wise. And a lot of people will ask me, especially on the Ask Matty show, like, by this date, what do you think XRP price is going to be? And I hate that question, and I always kick it down the road because it's such a silly question. But we look at a variety of different modeling, especially when you have a lot of price action on older assets like XRP or even like Zcash and Bitcoin, and you have a lot of different cycles to look back on. You can use multiple Fibonacci clusters to work off of to kind of target and see if there's any overlap in those areas of interest. So, when we look at XRP as a whole, and we'll take a look at the chart here in a little bit, but we can see somewhere in the rounds of like on the low end here, like $5.30 to upwards of over $20 to $24, using two different very large scale Fibonacci retracement zones, one that goes back over 10 years and one that's a little bit more recent here, from the previous cycle high and previous cycle low. And then even when you study a little bit more of the recent price actions developing for the last 18 months or so, a lot of those numbers continue to line up. And not that any particular, financial tool, any modeling is ever going to be 100% perfect, but it's about probability. So when we also apply those projected prices against the expected market cap required there, and then we also model it against the expectations of what we see for the entire crypto market cap, not just for XRP, they fall relatively reasonable, especially percentage-wise, both with what we've seen XRP grow in comparison against total market cap for crypto and the market cap for XRP within itself, as well as the expected growth, even on the low end for the total market cap. So even if we only see, let's say, 1/3 or 1/4 of our expected total market cap growth for crypto, XRP hitting somewhere in the $8 to $11 to $13 region is still extremely reasonable. So I think a lot of people will, take their modeling, and what they do is they go to their favorite influencer and they take the price, they pick 2 or 3 fundamental narratives, and they go, boom, that's the price we're going to hit. Or even worse, they'll reverse engineer and go, well, I want to make this much money. This is how much XRP I have. So XRP is going to get to this price. And really, I would love for XRP to go exponentially higher than where I think it might land, right? I would love for it to go to $200 a coin, $10,000 a coin. I'd love for all those things, right? It would make my life a lot easier. Probably would yap less with you guys on here on YouTube if that was the case, if we were all the way up there. But I just don't think it's reasonable, and I'd rather have lesser expectations that are a little bit more rooted in, just proportional market cap forecasting and modeling than keeping my head in the clouds and hoping for something more. I think David Schwartz shares a lot of that, and he's, I would say, very like technology neutral to technology agnostic. He doesn't really lean on the side of, XRP even being the absolute best technology. I think that he's a person that is constantly evolving and looking at other pieces of tech out there that he thinks are doing well. So I think that I respect a lot of his opinions on, some of this like ridiculous modeling being something we shouldn't be really spending too much time on.